There's been a number of news articles that have come out regarding retro gaming recently that have kind of shined a light on something that I kind of feel like nobody's talking about. There's a lot of articles that are kind of tackling one issue or another, but there seems to be a correlation between several of these articles that I noticed. And I wanted to kind of bring them to light and discuss them and get everyone's opinion, feel what, kind of get a feeler for what you guys think when I talk about this. So, in my opinion, the reason why we're at the place that we're at regarding emulation and ROMs, retro gaming, the entire scene, with companies going after their IPs, making sure that they're secured and everything, I think it has something to do with the fact that today's gamers, modern day gamers, and I'm not talking about people who have gamed their whole life. I'm talking about people who started gaming like at a very early age, at the right around the 3D era beginning, like PlayStation 1, Xbox, PS1, PS2, Xbox, that whole era. There is a certain lack of respect when it comes to retro video games and fan service and a lot of things that have been discussed recently. So there's 3 articles that we're going to talk about today. So the first is an article which I just read about Shadow of the Tomb Raider and how Shadow of the Tomb Raider is going to have classic skins, and the writer of the article basically made fun of these classic skins. And to me, I look at the classic skins and I'm like, that's really cool. Like, it's awesome that they were able to put that classic style, that retro polygon style. And this is not the first time that they've done it with Tomb Raider games, nor is this the first time that they did it with other series like Metal Gear. They did it with Metal Gear, which was pretty cool. With one of the recent Metal Gear Solid games, they had like a retro Solid Snake style from the PS1 era. So there seems to be this stigma with modern day gamers where they look at stuff like that from that 3D era or even further back, the 2D era, and they're like, I have friends who are modern day gamers. Maybe they grew up casually being into retro stuff, but their big focus, or where they started gaming big time, was this recent era, probably like Xbox 360, Xbox, PS3, PS2, like that whole era. So it's just really funny to me to see these people complain about this stuff, and do they not understand that it's not for them? This is for us, for lifelong gamers, for retro gamers, for gamers who, even though a specific era is over, they can appreciate and enjoy a specific amount of fan service dedicated to that. I'm not talking about like topless chicks or whatever, or fan servicey stuff like like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking specifically about, hey, we're making a new game, we're gonna throw in something that's kind of retro to kind of throw back to the original or to some of the original games. And for whatever reason, the gamers, modern day gamers, look down on this stuff and they turn their noses up at it and think that it's stupid or it's cheesy or whatever, and that's fine. I understand, it's not from their time. It's not something they appreciate or they grew out of it. So I get it, but it's going to eventually lead to my final story. So let's do story number 2. So story number 2 involves a recent Kotaku article. And it was purely clickbait, but for the most part it was saying that the writer could not believe that 3DS games were still coming out when we have the Switch, and how it's a big waste of time and effort on the developers' parts to come out with all these games that are coming out on 3DS, like WarioWare, the new WarioWare game. I think there's like a Shin Megami Tensei game that's coming out on the 3DS. Luigi's Mansion's getting a re-release on the 3DS. And first off, this is nothing new. Retro games or older generations of games have always done this. I mean, even recently, like the PlayStation 3, I think it's still possibly coming out with games. The PS2 came out with games till like what, 2013 or something like that. So, and even like Wii, recently there was a Wii release that's coming out. It's like a Just Dance or something like that. And even when I think way back in the day, you look back at the games that came out in like the late NES era, and a lot of them now are super appreciated. They're like hidden gems, and it's games like, oh, I don't know, like Panic Restaurant or like Little Samson, stuff like that for Super NES, like you know, some of the games that were either unreleased, like Nightmare, what's that game called, like Nightmare Busters or something like that, stuff like that. So there's a whole list of games that came out like late in a console's life cycle, where the system was, should have been dead and buried. The Super Nintendo was out, or the Genesis, or whatever, and there were still games coming out. So, and you look at some of those games, and they're some of the best games on the system. So, to me, the writer, in my opinion, is not a full-fledged gamer where they can't appreciate playing older games on an older system. It's always getting upgrades, get the latest and greatest. And I understand that to a point, but there's still people out there, like personally myself, even though I have a PlayStation 4, I'm still rocking a Wii U, and I have a 3DS, and I enjoy it. And I'm, still picking up games for them. So, maybe not the Wii U, but I'm still checking out the back catalog of some of these systems, because some of them have really great games. And I still buy retro games. There's still games that come out for retro systems, like the NES, the Super NES. Hell, I'm waiting on Holy Diver to come out for the first time on the NES, thanks to Castlevania games. So there is still room for life for these older consoles. To me, it feels like the people that say that kind of stuff they're not in it for the games, they're in it for the fashion statement, the fashionistic appeal of video gaming, or they are tech gurus who just want the latest and greatest and who just want to move on when an old game, when an old system is done, when it's dead and buried. So now we move on to our final story. And that is the recent emulation purge for the ROMs that have been going on with Nintendo. Nintendo's been going after all these companies, trying to shut them down. And one of the biggest ones, Emuparadise, recently got attacked and, or got threatened, and they decided to take their ROMs down. Now, personally, I'm not against ROMs. I think it's okay for them to be out there, because in some way, shape, or form, there's no other way to play some of this stuff. So, to me, ROMs are okay. I don't have an issue with ROMs being out there. I personally prefer to play on the actual equipment that, the equipment with the original game and everything. So the problem that we have is that if people don't respect the past, then the past is going to disappear in a lot of ways, and it'll only be accessible to those who really, really try to search for it, like really heavily. I mean, sure, there's going to be torrents out there, there's going to be other ROM sites, but I feel like it's all kind of connected in a way. So you've got, just to kind of recap, you've got people who feel that the classic look of retro games, either it being 2D or 3D, like early 3D or whatever the case may be, is ugly or uninspired. But there's got to be a level of respect out there to understand, to know where games came from. And, another big part of it is there's no archive system, so to speak. There is no film industry equivalent for the video game industry regarding safeguarding retro games. You know, yeah, that's what a lot of people are doing online, but you know, then you've got these companies who see that people mock all this retro stuff and don't appreciate it. I mean, granted, I didn't grow up with Atari, but I appreciate it for what it is. I respect it for what it is. A lot of the stuff is, to me, unplayable, but I respect it, I understand where it came from and where it was at the time. And I feel like the way that things have been going lately, you know, you've got a lot of writers that really are trying to push for this like progressive attitude to kind of move away from a lot of the things that, you know, the Japanese market brought to video games. You know, a lot of like fan service stuff, a lot of like questionable stuff, which, you know, I'm not gonna really dive too deep into. In my personal opinion, I feel that, you know, games are a work of art and you don't censor art. I guess what I'm getting at is, if you don't respect the past, why do you expect these companies to do anything to safeguard the past in these retro games? There's tons of arcade games which are gonna fall by the wayside. You know, stuff on MAME, stuff that is just unplayable unless you're playing it on MAME, or if you're playing it, you know, if it just so happens to be downloadable, which is very rare. You know, there's not all arcade games are, you know, some companies have done a great job, like SNK and Neo Geo and all that, but you know, Capcom and Capcom's done some. Then you've got some of the companies like Data East, for example. They did a classics collection a little while ago, but it only had a very small finite amount of games. And then there's like obscure games, you know, the games that are a little bit harder to find, stuff like Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and what's that game, like Night Thrashers or something like that. You know, games that have never had a port anywhere. And then you've got other games that have had ports, but then they got pulled digitally, and you can't re-download them, you know, willy-nilly. So that really frustrates me, because I would like to pay for these games, but if you don't put them out there, then no one's going to buy them. And if you don't appreciate the market for what it is, even if you don't like it, you still should respect it and appreciate it. And I think that is one of the big reasons why a lot of game developers look at, you know, game developers and game publishers look at this stuff and they go, why are we going to put out another arcade collection with stuff like Cadillacs and Dinosaurs on it when nobody respects that stuff? You know, nobody wants that stuff. Only like super retro gamers want it. You know, these modern gamers, that's their market. That's what they're going for the most part. So that's kind of my attitude about it. I'm curious what you guys think. You know, I want to have a discussion with you, so leave comments down below. Do you think that there's a lack of respect in the modern video game market from modern gamers that kind of makes it so that companies don't want to safeguard that stuff? Sure, it costs money, but do you think that that's part of the reason, that attitude of you know, retro games or games coming out for older systems and, you know, fan servicey type stuff that's really supposed to be more for the classic retro gamers and the longtime fans of the franchises, being mocked for being quote-unquote ugly? So that's what I'm curious about, if you think all of that combined is kind of you know, contributing to this this interesting time that we have where companies, specifically Nintendo, is going after these, you know, emulation companies to try to safeguard their own information. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, and appreciate you sticking with me for this entire rant. Check out the rest of the channel if you want, if you haven't already, and I will see you on the flip side.